Perhaps the most significant thing that is lost from the Oklahoma history textbook is the downplay of Kate Barnard. She's the very first woman to be elected to any major office of any state in 1907. Kate Barnard is downplayed probably because she starts exposing the relationship between those people that were supposed to have taken care of Indians and oil companies that are going to start actively taking, basically the money that belongs to Indian kids, specifically orphans. So in 1908, when she takes over the Charities and Corrections Commission, she begins publicizing that protection against guardians sought. Indian minors are being systematically robbed in many instances. Aid of the legislature is invoked. So she is starting to stand up for Indians. And in fact, in the 1911 report, you'll see pages of the listings of Native American kids who were specifically being ripped off by guardians. And I say ripped off. It means because judges were appointing guardians, and those guardians were taking that money, and they were not paying the kids. And in addition to that, they were also making payments to the judges. There's lots of evidence for that. So even after the allotments are done, we're going to start seeing the systematic dispossession of tribes in the state. In 1908, in 1902, Eula Eagle, who was a Muskogee Creek orphan, when she started receiving her land from her money from her allotments, she was found hanged at age 10. Now, her oil estate at that time was worth $26 million. In other words, by today's standards, she was worth $702 million. So the fact that she was a little girl and that she's found hanged starts giving us indications of what's going to happen to other children that have oil. You continue on to the next page: Marshall County, Nowata County, Muskogee County. The numbers of children that are having their allotment or having their funds stolen, their oil money, is incredible. In 1911, two Muskogee Creek freedmen children that had allotments at the Glenpool site where oil was discovered, their house was dynamited, and as a result they were killed. 1915, Kate successfully gets legislation passed in Oklahoma that makes it illegal for sharing in the estate of a victim for whose death or disablement a guardian was responsible. In other words, what was happening was the guardians were literally killing some kids because then they inherited the property. And these are lawyers in Oklahoma, by the way. It was 1911, further reports of those individuals in Ofuskie County. So it reports that 60,000 Indian miners with lands valued at 130 million acres, plus oil valued at $25 million, were placed under jurisdiction of 40 county judges. And the judges began rewarding their supporters by guardianship appointments. So she is seeking legislation for guardian reforms in 1919. 1910, here's an advertisement for Indian land for sale. 1912, the Osage experience is chronicled in this book called Killers of the Flower Moon. It details how some Osage women were married and then they were subsequently killed and murdered. So that way people could get a hold of their oil, and other murders, and why the FBI was formed to investigate that. 1912, the Choctaws hired the lawyers of McCurtain and Hill. The reason being is because one attorney was exposed as having 350 children, and all of their timber was being sold. One attorney was exposed as having 140 children whose land was being leased with option to purchase. Again, in 1911, you start seeing the names in Oklahoma County, Omoe County. One Muskogee Creek boy in 1912, he had oil land in Jinx and he was kidnapped. The Federal Secret Service found him 5 months later in England. One Muskogee Creek girl was handed a pencil and then she was given the receipt with an X mark for her Hughes County allotment. John Cordell of Hodaville stated that forgery and securing deeds is now the rule instead of the exception. Again, you see children in Pushmataha, Seminole County, Sequoyah Counties, Tulsa County. McCurtain County, there was an epidemic of deaths. Indians were provided free wills, and then suddenly there were suspicious fatalities in that county. Someone was using carbolic acid and ground glass and were killing these Indians to receive the wills, basically their property. In 1911, the county judge resigned because 4,133 acres was quitclaimed through his office. In other words, people were just committing fraud to steal Indian land. As a result, Barnard's agents in Idabel received multiple death threats. So, all in all, she reports that she was able in 1911 to regain $949,000, which today is worth $22 million. And this is from poor children that should have received their property from the guardians for oil. So 13,500,000 acres between 1908 and 1934, 13,500,000 acres are stolen. This leaves 72,000 Indians landless. Indian children under Dawes Commissioner, the first senator in 1912, who wanted to remove restrictions. Indian children's oil money was charged at 19.3% cost, while white guardianship in the state were regulated at 2.3% cost for attorneys. Tams Bixby is accused by Congress of looting their wards, of profiting by their positions, and of speculating in their official duties. That's what Mr. Little said in the Congressional Globe. You can go there and see it yourself. So Tams Bixby, who was the chairman of the Dawes Commission, becomes a wealthy oil man because of loss of property. In addition, Wirt Franklin became a wealthy oil man. He was the Dawes clerk. 1913, the Oklahoma legislature will deny funding for Kate Barnard's department, and she will continue to work in her basement. And she grew ill and left in 1915, leaving Indians completely unprotected. 1915, she made her final plea to the New York Times, seeking, she says, that Oklahoma charges that there's a systematic plot to rob the Indian full-bloods and minor heirs of Oklahoma of more than $200 million worth of coal lands, and she's asking for legislation from Congress to stop this. Angie DeBow, whose history and Still the Water Runs, which was not published in Oklahoma but was published by Princeton. As a result, her files and her books on Barnard's files was denied publication in Oklahoma. John Rockefeller, by 1916, the monopolies and obviously the oil money he's getting from Oklahoma will make him one of the first billionaires in the United States. World War I, another thing that's not mentioned very well in the Oklahoma history textbooks is the fact that the Choctaw Code Talkers in World War I, which will inspire the United States to expand that in World War II, those 14 Choctaw Code Talkers, a number of them were awarded very distinguished services by Congress recently. One famous person, Joseph Oklahoma, won the Croix de Guerre, which is the highest award you can be awarded by the French for gallantry. He captured more individuals than Sergeant York did single-handedly. 1923, another thing that's not in the Oklahoma history textbooks is the Teapot Dome scandal, which involves two Oklahomans. Number one was Ardmore oilman Jay Cammon. Now, he had spent $1 million giving it to President Harding's election so that way he could become Secretary of Interior. They wanted oil in what's now called Teapot Dome in Wyoming. But before Hammond could relocate, and the article is cited to where you can go to it, he is shot to death by his mistress. As a result, another Oklahoma oil man in Tulsa, Sinclair, who started the Farmers National Bank, which is now the Exchange National Bank, became the National Bank of Tulsa, which became the Bank of Oklahoma, the BOK Center. He will go to prison because he will give over $404,000 to Secretary Falls to get access for Sinclair to the Teapot Dome. Another scandal that's not mentioned in the Oklahoma history textbooks is the Oklahoma Supreme Court scandal in 1964, where it was brought out that Supreme Court justices in Oklahoma were accepting bribes for throwing cases certain directions. It was a very significant scandal. Another one in 1984, 20 years later, is the Oklahoma County Commissioner scandal, where nearly all of the 60 counties had indictments against county commissioners who were accepting bribes, essentially in kickbacks for property in Oklahoma. 1991, there was the Oklahoma school bond scandal. And so one of the things you'll see is that USA Today has rated Oklahoma as among the most corrupt of the 50 states.